Good afternoon. The first item of business this afternoon is portfolio questions. The first portfolio is Deputy First Minister Responsibilities, Economy and Gaelic. And in question number 1, I call Davy Russell.
To ask the Scottish Government how its employability programmes support parents of young children aged 9 months to 3 years to return to work in light of the lack of funded childcare for this age group.
Minister Richard Lockhead.
Parental employability support is available for low-income parents through the No One Left Behind approach, emphasising the priority family groups, including parents with a child under 1. And key workers provide tailored one-to-one support to help remove barriers to employment, identifying flexible work opportunities and linking to wraparound services. The draft budget protects the £90 million for devolved employability services in 26-27, and with over £40 million of that supporting parents.
Davy Russell.
I thank the Minister for that answer. But just because mums are working full-time does not mean that the cost of parenting, especially childcare, can't ruin you financially. Yesterday, I heard from a mother of a 2-year-old who told me that while working compressed hours plus 2 hours after bedtime, there is no time to mentally recover, and low net pay after childcare means that there was no incentive for mothers to be in work. Does the Minister agree with me that if hard-working mothers earning reasonable wages are questioning whether they can still afford to work because of the crippling cost of childcare, then the system is broken and requires urgent reform for the sake of the economy, if nothing else?
Minister.
Families across Scotland have benefited from 1,140 funded hours of high-quality early learning childcare for all 3- and 4-year-olds and eligible 2-year-olds since 2021. Indeed, if families paid for this themselves, it would cost more than £6,000 per eligible child per year. So we are doing a lot in this area, and we have done the last few years, and we've invested heavily in this agenda. I agree, of course, with the sentiments outlined by the member, and we always think there's a lot more to do. Of course we do, but I think these statistics show that we are saving a lot of families a lot of money by helping with childcare support. And of course, I separately gave some indication of what's been invested through the employability agenda as well.
Question 2, Ruth Maguire.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what support will be available for young entrepreneurs alongside the £2.5 million of funding announced for the First Minister's Start-up Challenge.
Deputy First Minister Kate Forbes.
The draft budget introduces a £2.5 million Young Entrepreneurs Package to support young people to start, grow and scale businesses. This new funding package will build on existing support for young entrepreneurs, including the Entrepreneurial Education Fund and Young Edge Awards, and will also work with a range of partners to develop new programmes of support, like the recently launched First Minister's Start-up Challenge, led by the King's Trust and Decamai.
Ruth Maguire.
I thank the Deputy First Minister for that answer. The Deputy First Minister will be as keen as I am to ensure that bright young people get to take up this opportunity. There are many in my constituency who may face economic challenges or other barriers that mean that they won't think this sort of opportunity is for them. What can we do to let them know that it is?
Deputy First Minister.
Ruth Maguire is absolutely right, and we know that role models and mentorship are two of the most critical ways to support young entrepreneurs who are furthest from that path. There is a nomination process as part of the First Minister's Start-up Challenge to look at how we should engage with disadvantaged and underrepresented communities to ensure that they're aware of the challenge and its opportunities. And there's also funding that comes through the Entrepreneurial Education Fund for projects across Scotland which are supporting entrepreneurial learning from primary schools to colleges to expose more young people to entrepreneurship and the entrepreneurial mindset.
Supplementary, Stephen Kerr.
But of course, as the Deputy First Minister points out, the Start-up Challenge Fund excludes quite a lot of young people on the basis of their background, and that does risk the creation of a two-tier system of support for young entrepreneurs. Shouldn't support really be based on the quality of the idea, the scalability and the growth potential that the idea represents in terms of wealth creation, in terms of job creation?
Deputy First Minister.
Well, I think that there's an element I agree with from Stephen Kerr, which is that we live in a very fair and open economy, and therefore we want to support great ideas and great people to start and grow their business, irrespective of their background and irrespective of where they live. We do know in terms of the data, that some find it harder to break into that than others. So we know, for example, that only, I think it's £2 and 2 pence in every pound of investment goes to female entrepreneurs at the moment. So they may have a great idea, and they may be great people, but there's obviously a barrier there, which is why we established the Pathways programme. So the whole point of the Startup Challenge, the Pathways programme, is to try and provide additional support to what is universally available to ensure that those from disadvantaged backgrounds can get access to that help.
Good. Question 3 not lodged. Question 4, Sharon Dowie.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what its response is to the recent report by the Institute of Chartered Accountants in England and Wales showing that business confidence in Scotland has fallen for the 6th consecutive quarter and is lower than the UK average.
Minister.
The latest business barometer from the Bank of Scotland shows companies in Scotland reporting higher confidence in their own business prospects month on month in January, up 15 points to 53%, which is encouraging. However, business conditions, of course, remain challenging. The UK Government's increase in employers' national insurance contributions has had significant impact and contributed to reduced business confidence in Scotland, and we have repeatedly called on the UK Government to reverse this. And of course, we work closely with companies to provide greater certainty and stability, including improving regulatory practice to make it easier to invest and do business in Scotland.
Sharon Dowie.
Thank you. Hospitality businesses continue to report higher rates and energy costs than their competitors elsewhere in the UK, with industry leaders warning that closures are increasingly likely. They want an immediate pause to revaluation. Lochside House Hotel in my area have invested in their property. They now face having their rates increased by £271,000. Businesses are actually getting penalised for investing. There simply is not an incentive to grow. So in light of collapsing business confidence and calls from the sector, will the Minister commit today to pausing the upcoming revaluation? And if not, why not?
Minister.
The Scottish Budget 26-27 will ensure the lowest basic property rate since 2018-19 and support business and communities with a package worth an estimated £864 million, of which many hospitality businesses will benefit. And of course, acknowledging the impact of the revaluation, we will introduce a revaluation transitional relief to protect those seeing the most significant increases in rateable values, ensuring the gross bills of an estimated 60,000 properties are lower in 26-27 than they otherwise would have been. And of course, we continue to offer a range of other benefits, such as the most generous relief package for the energy generating sector in the UK, also reliefs like the Business Growth Accelerator and other sectors as well.
Supplementary, Emma Harper.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Whether it's taxes on our world-class whisky industry, Brexit red tape on our local businesses, or running down our industries in the North East, does the Minister agree that Scotland has been hammered by the consequences of the choices being made by Westminster Government that's out of touch with the reality here in Scotland? And can the Minister say any more on what the Scottish Government is doing to combat this and boost confidence and growth in Scotland?
Minister.
Well, yes, I absolutely agree. It's a shame that the Conservative benches are humming and hawing and sighing when they hear criticism of Westminster policies, because I know that I represent a constituency in the north east of Scotland that straddles the Highlands as well, and many of my businesses locally, as is the case in much of Scotland, are really heavily impacted by Westminster policies, particularly Brexit, which has been hugely damaging, particularly to our rural industries, and our exports to Europe, of course, have taken a big hit because of that as well, and a range of other policies such as higher energy costs and, of course, national insurance contributions that have risen rapidly. So I do, of course, agree with the members' points, and, of course, that's why the Scottish Budget addresses a lot of support for the Scottish business community.
Question 5, Paul McLean.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what implications the recent announcement of next steps for its £1.5 billion bonds programme will have for the financing of major capital projects across Scotland.
Deputy First Minister.
So the multi-year bond programme will provide financing for major capital projects across Scotland. All proceeds from a future bond issuance will be used exclusively for capital investment in line with our legal powers. Specific issuance plans will be subject to market conditions at the time, but the bonds will support delivery of capital infrastructure priorities announced in the spending review and the infrastructure delivery pipeline, which were published alongside the budget in January. And the bonds programme is an opportunity for us to diversify into cost-effective sources of borrowing, to attract investment into Scotland and to grow the economy.
Paul McLennan.
Thank you, President Officer, and can I thank the Deputy First Minister for her answer. Can she highlight the key sectors that will benefit from the bonds programme and how other government agencies such as SNIB and SFT can help leverage in additional funds?
Deputy First Minister.
Well, it will support sectors, a number of sectors across Scotland. Obviously, it underpins the infrastructure delivery pipeline, and it's difficult to distinguish between different sectors who might all benefit from, for example, improvements to core infrastructure like roads and bridges and so on. But there are key investments in projects that will improve our transport, digital connectivity, modernise the justice system, enhance health and education facilities, and agencies like Scottish National Investment Bank are making mission-aligned investments across Scotland to grow the economy, and they recently celebrated their 5-year anniversary, and their investments have already crowded in over £1.4 billion of third-party co-investment.
A couple of supplementaries. First, Murdo Fraser.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Will the cost of borrowing through these bonds be higher or lower than the cost of borrowing through UK Treasury?
Deputy First Minister.
So the member will know that in terms of the cost of borrowing, that will be determined at that point in time, and we all hope for a more stable and prosperous economy, I think, which might influence the cost of borrowing. But I think the key point that this is obviously a direct response to the recommendation of the First Minister's investor panel. And the investor panel is made up of Scotland's best and brightest minds on investment. And they were absolutely crystal clear that one of the advantages of the bond issuance is actually to put Scotland on the map and to become an attractive place for other private sector investment that might not be directly linked to the bond programme itself. In other words, it's not public borrowing, but it does leverage in additional private sector investment. So my point would be that if you take a very narrow approach in terms of direct cost, you're totally missing the point of that wider private sector investment.
And Daniel Johnson.
The question isn't just the cost of borrowing, but also transaction costs. Could the Deputy First Minister set out what the cost will be in terms of bankers' fees, accountants' fees, and indeed fees to the credit ratings agency for raising these bonds?
Deputy First Minister.
The member will know 2 points, and both in response to Murdo Fraser. We're more than happy. Maybe we should do a briefing session, which might help members to understand the process a little bit more. Obviously, at this point in time, that will be determined when we enter into those transactions by that third-party broker. But my point would be that right now the attractiveness of the Scottish economy to investors is growing. The investor panel, and I don't think any of you could disagree with the merit of the individuals that sat on that panel, were that this was an opportunity for Scotland to secure additional private sector investment over and above what might be secured through the bond issuance programme alone.
Question 6 was not lodged. Question 7, Rona Mackay.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what immediate economic outcomes were for Scotland's exporters of its recent trade mission to the United Arab Emirates.
Deputy First Minister.
Well, it enabled almost 30 Scottish companies to showcase Scotland's strengths in energy transition, agri-tech, food and drink and critical technologies. There were 6 Scottish universities who joined the programme. That included both official events and bilateral business meetings. And I also held a number of meetings with UAE government ministers and signed a bilateral investment memorandum of understanding to deepen investment cooperation. And so the economic outcomes for Scottish economies were extremely strong off the back of this week.
Rona Mackay.
I thank you for the answer. Does the Deputy First Minister have further details on the specific support available to help small Scottish firms secure international contracts in this market over the coming year?
Deputy First Minister.
Well, we're very conscious right now that for Scottish firms, there is quite a degree of instability around the world, and US tariffs are obviously having an impact on some of those companies. And so the commitment from the government is to ensure that we open up new markets and support companies that want to export. And so companies can take advantage of a range of export support provided by Scottish Development International. That includes bespoke export programmes and trade missions and access to our network of overseas trade specialists. And having spoken directly to a number of the companies that were there, each of them could reference specific advantages that they had secured as a result of doors being opened through this trade mission. And we hope that that ensures that Scottish exports continue to grow and the value for Scotland and for Scotland's economy also continues to grow.
Question 8, Daniel Johnson.
To ask the Scottish Government what its response is to the Cities Outlook 2026 report and the performance of Scottish cities.
Deputy First Minister.
Well, the report is very interesting, and we obviously read these reports with some interest. We have committed up to £1.9 billion of investment in city, region and regional growth deals across Scotland, and we are seeing results already, and that demonstrates the effectiveness of partnership working in upgrading public infrastructure and driving growth in our cities and regions.
Daniel Johnson.
So according to the report, Scottish cities have seen a real terms fall in disposable income since 2013. Now, if Scottish cities had grown at the rate of the best performing English cities, people in Glasgow, Edinburgh, Aberdeen and Dundee would be £12,000 a year better off. And that's not random. Indeed, Scottish cities grew more quickly in the previous decade. So what changed? In my view, is combined authorities, devolving powers from the centre around planning, skills and infrastructure have delivered higher growth. And whereas Scotland's cities have real strengths and real proximity, we have a Scottish powerhouse. I would ask the Cabinet Secretary, when was the last time the Scottish Government had a cities policy?
Deputy First Minister.
Well, I know that Daniel Johnson always likes it when I say that I'll take something away to think about, so I will think about his question. But in terms of the direct response, I absolutely believe in the strength of our cities. I mean, globally, Glasgow and Edinburgh, Aberdeen when it comes to energy transition, Edinburgh when it comes to financial services, Dundee when it comes to life sciences, Glasgow when it comes to culture and the growth that we've seen in financial services in particular. The strengths are incredibly impressive, and our commitment is to continue to empower the cities to make decisions that are appropriate for their areas.
A couple of supplementaries first. Jackie Dunbar.
Officer, the report lays bare the stark outlook for Aberdeen if left in the hands of a Labour government apparently intent on the deindustrialisation of Scotland and content to risk thousands of jobs in the energy sector. The Tories obviously agree with me.
Ms Dunbar, could you please resume your seat? Could I make a plea to the front benches not to be shouting across the chamber while we're trying to get a question? Jackie Dunbar, please continue.
Thank you. Can the Deputy First Minister advise what discussions she has had with the UK Government around the removal of the Energy Profits Levy, something which experts, charities and workers themselves are all calling for?
Deputy First Minister.
Forgive me, Presiding Officer. I'm very sorry about shouting across the chamber, but it does provide me with an opportunity to confirm that Craig Hoy had asked who started it. And when it comes to the Energy Profits Levy, I'm delighted to confirm to the chamber that it was the Conservatives, and Labour have doubled down on it, increased it, extended it and failed to end it when it was required. Meanwhile, it's having a hugely damaging impact on jobs, investment and opportunities in the north east of Scotland, and we are doing what we can to call on the Chancellor to remove the EPL, replace it, and we hope that other members who are seeing the damage will do likewise.
And Stephen Kerr.
Getting back to the substance of the question, let's talk about Glasgow, in particular Scotland's largest city, because it is ranked 35 out of the 63 largest cities and towns in Britain in terms of productivity. That productivity measurement, lost productivity measurement in economic terms, is £7.3 billion. So I think there's a logical question on the basis of the fact that we've had a growth deal in Glasgow for some years now. What tangible, realisable, measurable improvements have there been in Glasgow's productivity because of the growth deal?
Deputy First Minister.
I think the answer is found in the investors and developers who have chosen to relocate to Glasgow precisely because of the skill of the people and of the potential to grow. JP Morgan and Barclays, as two examples, global firms could locate anywhere. They've chosen Glasgow and made Glasgow into a financial hub. And I think that whatever I say, speaking to them, they're quite clear about why they did it in terms of access to skill and labour, and what their hopes are in terms of growth and aspiration.
Thank you. That concludes portfolio questions and Deputy First Minister responsibilities. There will be a brief pause before we move to the next item of business to allow front benches to change. Okay, the next item of business is portfolio questions on finance and local government. Just a reminder that questions 1 and 5 have been grouped. I'll therefore take any supplementaries on those questions after the substantive questions have been answered. I call question number 1, Mark Griffin.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what its response is to COSLA's statement that the draft budget 2026-27 represents a very poor settlement for local government, which fails to address the financial situation being faced by councils across Scotland.
Cabinet Secretary Shona Robison.
So independent commentators agree that the local government settlement has increased in real terms. COSLA's budget reality analysis acknowledges that there is an additional £234.9 million of uncommitted core revenue funding for councils, and the budget also provides a further £773 million of funding consolidation and multi-year envelopes to support forward planning. Mark
Griffin.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer, but Presiding Officer, it was COSLA's resource spokesperson, not an independent commentator. It was SNP councillor Ricky Bell who said that leaders agreed that this year's settlement is a very poor settlement for local government. If the Scottish Government can't convince SNP leaders and councillors this budget is a good budget for councils and communities, why should the public believe it?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, look, I don't think there's ever been a budget that COSLA have not taken some issue with, and that is their role on behalf of local government. So they asked for £750 million for adult social care in a single year. That would have been more than the entire resource consequentials for the entire spending review. So it just did not exist in the quantum that they would have liked. But what we have done is given them the flexibility of nearly £235 million in the general revenue grant. We have baselined hundreds of millions of more funding, and it is a real terms increase as confirmed by commentators, including, of course, Spice and the Accounts Commission.
Question 5, Neil Bibby.
To ask the Scottish Government what discussions it's had with COSLA following the publication of its draft budget 2026-2027.
Cabinet Secretary.
The Scottish Government met with COSLA on the 14th of January for formal post-budget engagement and continues to meet with COSLA and individual local authorities on a regular basis to cover a range of topics, including the 2026-27 budget.
I'm going to take first supplementary for Kenneth Gibson.
Bibby. Sorry, second. Thank you, Presiding Officer, and thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer. Cuts to councils are cuts to schools, cuts to care services and cuts to street cleaning. But don't take my word for it. Senior SNP councillor Ricky Bell has warned that this SNP government's proposed real terms cuts to council budgets will result in reductions in services and jobs. The convener of the Finance Committee, also a senior member of the Cabinet Secretary's own party, has also called the local government the poor relation of this budget. Does the Minister agree with her own SNP colleagues, or is she saying Councillor Bell and Mr Gibson are wrong?
Apologies again, Mr Bibby. Cabinet Secretary.
Well, what I would say, of course, is that Councillor Ricky Bell and indeed COSLA have a job to do on behalf of local government. I totally respect that. What I'm saying, though, is that independent commentators, including, of course, Spice, which informs MSPs in this Parliament, whether or not they heed the advice of Spice is another matter, confirm that there's real terms increase in funding to local government. And, of course, as recently as the 16th of January, Spice also confirmed that the past 3 Scottish budgets have all included real terms increases for the local government revenue settlement, as have the Accounts Commission. But if Neil Bibby believes that there should be more money for local government, he can, of course, propose that on behalf of his party in the stages of the budget bill. But, of course, he will then have to say where that money has to come from. But if he wants to come and see me and propose where that money should come from, my door is always open.
Number of supplementaries first. Kenneth Gibson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can the Cabinet Secretary advise the Chamber how much local authorities will have to find in 2026-27 to meet ongoing costs of the UK Government's public-private partnerships from some 20 years ago, which I believe are still costing us around £1 billion a year, and indeed the increased employer national insurance contributions imposed on local authorities from April last year?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, of course, Kenny Gibson is right to draw attention to the fact that local authorities will be paying the price for the Labour and indeed Tory-flawed PFI and PPP deals for some years to come. I think Kenny Gibson got a written question outlining the scale of those costs. And, of course, she's right also to point to the additional costs of employer national insurance contributions, meaning that that public services in Scotland will face a £400 million annual shortfall, which of course also impacts on local government. If Labour colleagues in here want to be helpful, perhaps they could be lobbying the UK Labour government to give us full funding for employers' national insurance contributions.
Craig Coy.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. This morning I met with Councillor Ricky Bell of COSLA, and they remain extremely concerned about this budget settlement, particularly the Scottish Government's failure to fully fund living wage pay increases and the resulting cash crisis facing health and social care partnerships. In relation to the budget and the spending review settlement, the IFS disagrees with the Minister, and I quote, saying, "Local government and finance is set to see reductions averaging 2.1% a year in real terms, which would require council tax increases of around 8% just to hold budgets constant." So will the Minister now admit that people have seen through her smoke and mirrors and concede that as a result of decisions taken by this government, Scottish councils are being forced to raise tax on hard-working Scots?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, what an irony, given the Tories want to have £1 billion of unfunded tax cuts. That would mean an immediate cut to local government of the £235 million of funding in the General Revenue Grant. That would have to go immediately to fund £1 billion of unfunded tax cuts. And as for the real living wage, I'm very surprised that Tory politicians don't think that employers have a legal obligation to pay the statutory minimum wage. The funding we're providing is for the real living wage top-up. Employers should pay their statutory minimum wage, as they are required by law to do. We are providing hundreds of millions of pounds in order to provide the real living wage, something that his colleagues never did when they were in government in the UK. Not a penny went to the real living wage for social care.
I'm going to take another supplementary from the Conservative colleagues. I would hope that they were listening both to the question but also the answer with a bit more courtesy than they did to that one. Alexander Stewart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Cabinet Secretary once again has claimed that local government funding has risen in real terms. Given that the Scottish Fiscal Commission, the Fraser-Ballinger Institute and the Institute of Fiscal Studies talk about a 0.4% increase in real terms, does the Cabinet Secretary accept that councils the length and breadth of Scotland will have to pay more to get less, and individuals and communities will suffer because of this budget?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, as I said previously, of course, if Alexander Stewart wants to propose more money for local government, he is also welcome to come through my door and tell me where that money should come from. But, of course, we never see that happen. The real terms increase to local government settlement is 2% comparing budget to budget. You cannot compare to the ABR because of the in-year movement in funds. Spice have told members in this place that perhaps it's time they actually started paying attention to Spice briefings. Perhaps they could read them and understand them. And if they need any help in understanding them, again, my door is always open.
Question 2, Jackie Dunbar.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government how it envisages its draft Scottish Budget 2026-27 will support families in the Aberdeen-Donside constituency to address cost of living pressures, including childcare costs.
Cabinet Secretary.
The Scottish Budget sets out a range of support which will benefit families right across Scotland. This includes continuing to invest 1,140 hours of funded childcare, which would otherwise cost families £6,000 a year, setting out plans to go further by delivering a universal breakfast club offer for primary school-aged children and investing an additional £2.5 million each year to increase wraparound after-school clubs for families. This is in addition to wider action to tackle the cost of living, including through investment in our Warmer Homes Scotland scheme, free school meals and the game-changing Scottish Child Payment.
Jackie Dunbar.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer. The enhanced cost of living support included in the Scottish Budget means that people in Scotland will continue to benefit from the most generous cost of living package anywhere in the UK. The delivery of a new universal breakfast club offer for primary school-aged children will be of significant benefit to many of my constituents. Can the Cabinet Secretary provide any further information about how many children in Scotland are anticipated to benefit from this measure, and can she also advise how much this is anticipated to save families per week?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, the Scottish Government's investment will ensure that from 2027-28 breakfast clubs will be free and universally accessible for all primary school children in Scotland. The overall benefit in terms of the saving to families attending will be shaped by the numbers attending, but would be equivalent of an hour's additional childcare. So we anticipate that this additional flexibility will support employment opportunities, whether in new positions or in enabling parents to take on additional hours.
Question 3, Claire Adamson.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what engagement it has had with COSLA.
Can we have Miss Adamson's microphone, please?
It's my fault. Put it on. Sorry. To ask the Scottish Government what engagement it has had with COSLA regarding payroll practices in local authorities that can result in two wage payments in a single universal credit assessment period that can lead to reduced entitlement, rent arrears, and includes in relation to support available for those affected.
Minister Ivan McKee.
The Scottish Government has repeatedly called on the UK Government to address the fundamental issues with universal credit, which we have spent £1.3 billion mitigating the worst aspects of over the last 15 years. As part of the DWP's ongoing review of universal credit, the Scottish Government has written to the UK Government to set a number of concerns that we believe reduce the effectiveness of universal credit. Regarding the specific issue that Claire Adamson raises, I'm grateful to her for raising that important matter, and the Scottish Government will seek to engage with COSLA to explore this further.
Claire Adamson.
I thank the Minister for that answer. One of my constituents was affected by this in the December period when she received two payroll payments despite no increase in annual income. This affects the most vulnerable people in our society. It results in affecting the universal credit and housing benefit, leading to rent arrears. I would welcome the Minister's answer, but also has he investigated with those employers within the sphere of influence of government whether this practice is wider spread?
Minister. We certainly do have the intention to investigate more further across the public sector the extent of this issue to understand the impact it's having, and by discussing with those public sector employers to understand if there is opportunities to address that issue with regards to payroll timing and with regards to support more widely to help households in Scotland struggling with their housing costs. This year we are investing a record £100 million in discretionary housing payment to reduce poverty, safeguard tenancies and prevent homelessness. The Scottish Welfare Fund also provides people on low incomes with emergency grants if they're facing a crisis, homelessness or other housing or caring challenges. And I would encourage anyone concerned about rent arrears to contact their local authority to access support.
Okay, question 4 is not lodged. Question 6, Alexander Burnett.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government whether it will provide an update on the work that it is doing to recognise rurality in local government finance settlements.
Cabinet Secretary.
Rurality is a key element of the needs-based distribution formula that is discussed and agreed with COSLA on behalf of all 32 local authorities each year. The Scottish Government and COSLA keep the distribution formula, including rurality indicators, under constant review through the Joint Settlement and Distribution Group to ensure it targets funding towards those with the most need.
Alexander Burnett.
Aberdeenshire has the lowest funded rural council in Scotland, and it also is amongst the most expensive public services to deliver across miles of coast and glen. Years of penny-pinching SNP budgets and eye-watering cuts mean there are no real savings left to be had. We've got over 3,000 miles of road to be maintained, over 1,800 bridges, more per capita than anywhere else in Scotland. And when cuts are implemented, rural areas are suffering more. Bin collections are cancelled, public transport comes to a halt, grit bins aren't where they need to be. The result is that residents in some parts of a shire are paying the same council tax as those in larger towns, indeed other parts of Scotland, but are receiving noticeably less in return. So does the Cabinet Secretary recognise that her underfunding of councils has created a postcode lottery of public services in Scotland?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I think Alexander Burnett should be honest with his constituents that proposing £1 billion of unfunded, unaffordable tax cuts would wipe out any increase to the local government settlement. So the £235 million that local government has received for the 26-27 budget would go. Absolutely, every penny of it would go, and there would be not a single penny of extra funding for Aberdeenshire Council. So he should be honest with his constituents about that. In terms of the formula, if the member disagrees with the formula, then I would suggest that the distribution formula, which has to be agreed with 32 local authorities, with COSLA, I'm sure they would be very open to suggestions that could be raised. But of course, that requires the agreement of the 32 local authorities. But I'm sure they would be very keen to hear Alexander Burnett's constructive proposals to be put forward.
Fergus Hugh.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I have a constituent farmer, Neil Gordon, in Baldon, who relies on the use of Baldon Bridge to carry out his work. That bridge has recently been closed because of safety concerns for work that requires to be done. As a result, after doing a day's work, he has to undergo a trip of 100 miles in his car. His business is, frankly, being made nearly inoperable because of this, and it all comes down to money, Cabinet Secretary, that the Highland Council hasn't got. And if you want to know, if the Cabinet Secretary wants to know where she can get it from, well, 250 peat restoration, 200 million decarbonisation of buildings, or £20,000 increases granted recently to the salaries of Greater Glasgow and Lothian Health Board just for doing their job. There's plenty of money, Cabinet Secretary. It's going on the wrong things to the wrong people.
Always through the chair and relevant to the substantive question. Cabinet Secretary.
Thank you. I think this Parliament has been unanimous in its support for the climate action that is required to be taken for Scotland. I think it would be disappointing if we were to remove the absolutely critical investments in peatland restoration and decarbonisation and avoid Scotland playing its part. However, on the point that Fergus Ewing made about the bridge concern, I am very happy for communication to continue with Highland Council. I think there has been communication with the Cabinet Secretary for Transport, but I will check that and I will make sure that Fergus Ewing gets a response on what those communications, the status of those communications at the moment.
Okay, a brief supplementary, Craig Hoy.
Presiding Officer, if the rural funding formula for councils is working and is fair, why is SNP-run Dumfries and Galloway Council presently consulting on the ending of free music tuition, removing funding for school-based police officers, shutting the Hillview Leisure Centre in Kellerholm and scaling back on gritting the roads across the region?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, Craig Hoy, of course, is the author of the tax policy that would remove every penny of funding from 32 local authorities that I have provided. The Tories cannot come here demanding more money for local government when they would remove every single penny of local government funding that this budget provides. And of course, they're going to vote against the £235 million of funding for local government that will help the 32 local authorities, including the local authority that Craig Hoy has referred to. They will vote against that funding. As I said earlier, the rurality distribution formula is agreed through the 32 local authorities, through the Joint Settlement and Distribution Group. I am sure they would be more than happy to see or hear Craig Hoy's positive contribution to that debate and suggest that he contacts COSLA to make those representations on behalf of the local authorities that he is saying that he is representing.
Okay, Mr Kerr, I've given you a couple of supplementaries in the portfolio question. If you want another supplementary, please press your button rather than shouting from a secondary position. Question 7, Jeremy Balfour.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government how much has been allocated in its draft budget 26-27 to replace the Investing Communities Fund when the current funding ends in March of this year.
Minister.
Following the publication of the budget, ministers have agreed funding to support an extension of the Investing in Communities Fund for the existing organisations supported by the fund, and this funding will provide support for 2026-27. We will give effect to this at the appropriate point through the budget bill process, which I hope Jeremy Balfour and other members across the chamber will support.
Jeremy Balfour.
While I'm grateful to the Minister for the limited extension, there is still a question of what comes next. What does he expect charities like Dr Bell's Family Centre and the Broomhouse Hub within my region, who rely on this funding, to do in a year's time when we are faced with this cliff edge again?
Minister.
Jeremy Balfour raised a very important point, and I'm very well aware, as are members across the chamber, of the importance of this fund in local communities. As I've indicated, the fund will continue through 26-27, and obviously with the new government coming in May, I'm sure that the discussion will begin very shortly thereafter on what would continue beyond 26-27.
Supplementary, Maggie Chapman.
Richard Lochhead said in response to my question last week that the ICF projects would receive assurances of funding for the next financial year. They have recently received correspondence that instructs them to submit a claim by the 20th of February. Does the Minister recognise that this timescale is very problematic, given notification periods for potential staff redundancies and the like? And therefore, can he give any update or indication of how long projects will have to wait to hear about the level of transitional funding after the 20th of February?
Minister.
Well, as I've indicated, funding is in place to extend the fund through 26-27, so I'll undertake to engage with officials to make sure that that is communicated adequately to the organisations in question, so that they have the surety about the continuation of that funding.
Okay, on question 8, Jamie Hepburn.
To ask the Scottish Government how much it is allocated in its draft budget 2026-27 to support local authorities, including North Lanarkshire Council, to provide universal breakfast clubs from August 2027.
Minister.
As announced during the 2026-27 draft budget statement, we will continue to invest £3 million to fund breakfast clubs, which were funded in 2025-26 through the Bright Start Breakfast Fund. We will also provide additional investment of £15 million to phase delivery of a national breakfast club offer. From 27-28, we will invest £44 million each year to deliver breakfast clubs for all children in primary school across Scotland by August 2027. Acknowledging the draft budget, decisions have not yet been made on funding distribution. We're working with COSLA, local government and wider partners to agree this.
Jamie Hepburn.
With around 25,000 pupils in North Lanarkshire alone, it's set to benefit by this policy. Clearly the numbers of young people across Scotland are significant. Can the Minister set out what the expected impact of this policy will be in sustaining reductions in child poverty in Scotland?
Minister.
Our £3 million investment in Bright Starts Breakfasts is already benefiting families most at risk of poverty and is an important step in meeting the First Minister's key priorities. The programme will reduce food insecurity and support parents to take up, sustain or increase employment, addressing barriers particularly for families on low incomes.
Okay, that concludes portfolio questions on finance and local government. There will be a brief pause before. Point of order, Douglas Ross.
I'm grateful, Presiding Officer. I've decided to do this point of order at the moment to get advice from you, but also so the government front bench can listen and hopefully respond. You will recall, Presiding Officer, on the 27th of November, this Parliament had to meet in emergency session to rush through legislation to fix a mistake in a bill that the SNP took through. Now, we found out during the course of that consideration of the bill that the government actually knew about this months before or weeks before they originally said they did. And there was confusion everywhere. Graham Day had to correct the official record. Ivan McKee had to be asked, I think, 3 or 4 times to finally get an answer from him. But I lodged amendments to that bill to get information out of the government. And it was important information. And we heard from all sides of the chamber that transparency was paramount in this issue, and we should be well informed. My amendments were not successful because the government whipped their members to vote them down. But from the front bench, Ivan McKee gave a commitment, a guarantee, to publish all of the information I was requesting. Indeed, he urged me not to press my amendments because he was going to do it anyway. So my question, Presiding Officer, is how long do we have to wait? That was the end of November last year. We're now into February 2026, and the government have not provided this information. So why is that? Did the Minister deliberately or otherwise mislead Parliament when he said he would release it? And what powers do we have as backbenchers, or you as Presiding Officer, to force and compel the government to provide the information they said they would, and indeed got support opposing my amendments on a commitment to release?
Thank you, Mr Ross. I think, as the Presiding Officer has made clear on a number of occasions where commitments are made by ministers, the expectation is that those will then be expedited as soon as possible. I'm not aware of the detail of the undertaking that ministers made on that occasion. The ministers will have heard the point that you make, and I think the expectation would be that a response would be provided to you and the Chamber as quickly as possible. Without further reflection on the detail of this case, it's difficult to say more than that. But as I say, the expectation of the Presiding Officer is where commitments are made, then there will be a response at the earliest opportunity. Point of order, Craig Hoy.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Can I seek your guidance as to how the Cabinet Secretary can correct the record in this place? Repeatedly during portfolio questions, Shona Robertson said that the Scottish Conservatives had proposed unfunded tax cuts of £1 billion. She is well aware that our plans are not unfunded, because last week we put on the record a detailed plan to cut £1 billion from the SNP's ballooning benefit bill. How can the Minister correct the record to ensure that the public at large know that our budget adds up, unlike the SNP's?
Not a point of order, Mr Hoy. You're well aware of the response that similar interventions have been made at the past. You've put your point on the record. With that, we are going to pause briefly while the Chair changes.